Chapter 15 of Luke's Gospel is the heart of his Gospel. In it, he presents three lost and found parables. The parable of the lost sheep, the lost sons, and the lost coin. They feature a waiting father, a proactive shepherd, and a coin. The 15th chapter presents a woman searching for a coin that glimmers in the corner, waiting for her to pick it up. My sermon this morning is entitled, Tony, Tony, Turn Around. Tony, Tony, turn around. Something's lost that must be found. If you're not a Roman Catholic, a former Roman Catholic, you may have never heard that prayer. I'm not a Roman Catholic or a former Roman Catholic, yet I had a friend who told me to pray that prayer when I lost my car keys. And when I've lost something, I'm pretty much willing to explore other faiths and try other alternative strategies to find that missing object. And so I did pray, and I did find my car keys. And so I did a little digging into this prayer and found that it is a prayer to Saint Anthony of Padua, who is believed to be the patron saint of lost items. The 13th century holy man left a wealthy family to become a poor priest. The tradition of invoking his help in finding lost items comes from a scene in his own life. He was, as the legend goes, at a Franciscan monastery where he had a beloved psalter, a book of psalms. In those days, there was no printing press, so books were very valuable. And in addition, he had written careful notes in the margins to use to instruct his students. So this was a precious possession for St. Anthony. Now, there was a novice in the monastery who had already, after just a few weeks, grown tired of living a religious life and had decided to make a break for it. But to add injury to insult, he ripped off St. Anthony's psalter and ran into the woods with it, fleeing across the forest. So when poor St. Anthony went to his room, to his prayer corner to pray and found it missing, he prayed a prayer that it would be returned to him. And after he prayed the prayer, and here the legend gets a little bit murky, so bear with me. I'm just repeating the legend. What happens then is the novice is fleeing through the forest and was met by a demon. So, okay, you just have to accept, I guess, that somehow a demon was the agent of God in this story. So the demon tells him that he's got to go back to the monastery and he's got to return the psalter, which he does. Thereupon, according to the legend, St. Anthony prayed a prayer that probably evolved over a couple of centuries, and this is it, attributed to him. The sea obeys, and fetters break, and shattered hopes thou dost restore, while treasures lost are found again, when young or old thine aid implore. Tony, Tony, turn around, something's lost that must be found, is the popular version. Do you know anybody who might be praying for the return of something that they have lost? Perhaps a marriage, maybe their health, maybe a limb lost in battle, maybe their youth, maybe a child or a pregnancy. There are a lot of people who have coins clattering around on the floor of their life. I remember talking to a man in one of my churches, and he said, I just can't come back to church because all I can think of is that my wife's funeral was held in this very room. Something's lost that must be found. Once I had a student many years ago, and I gave her a B on a sermon because we had talked in class about how you needed to have hope in a message, and her message was quite sorrowful, without a whole lot of uplift. So she came into my office and she said, Dr. McKenzie, I know that you told us that we needed to have hope in our sermons and good news. And I was listening in class, but I've had a miscarriage, and so I just don't feel hope. And so I didn't feel that I could pretend to feel something that I don't feel right now. So I understand if you want to give me a lower grade. Something's lost that must be found. There are actually a lot of things that we can lose in life. If you think about life as a lost and found box, and what in your life you might have the opportunity to have lost, the list is pretty long. I actually made up an alphabetical list of things that we might lose. You can lose direction. You can lose faith. You can lose your faculties. You can lose a friend. You can lose your focus. You can lose ground. You can lose your hair. You can lose hope. You can lose your heart to someone. You can lose your head. You can lose your keys. You can lose your mind. You can lose your mobility. You can lose your perspective. You can lose your respect for someone. You can lose your spark. You can lose your teeth. You can lose your temper. And you can lose your touch. There are things in life, one thing in particular though, that we don't so much have to lose, but more often we let it slip away. We let it slip away. I'm reminded of a time when I was living in Pennsylvania and I was in the church and I went into the narthex and they had a big lost and found box, big cardboard box. And I was looking for the companion blue mitten, my son was then 3, to the other blue mitten, and I had bought them for him so there was a string between them, which apparently he just thought was very uncool now that he was 3. So he had separated them and lost one of them. And I rummaged through the box looking for this blue mitten, and in the process I found a pair of car keys, and I found a house key, I found a wedding ring, I found an earring, I found a glove, and I found a pair of glasses. I tried them on, and they were prescription glasses. So I thought, isn't this strange? Maybe I should pick up this box, and next time we have a worship service, just walk up and down the aisles and hand out, the glove to the guy with the cold hands, and the key to the person locked out of their house, and the person who's been sitting on the front step because they can't drive away. It seemed like an awful lot of very important things were in the lost and found box. In the Gospel of Luke, there's one thing that Jesus is afraid his disciples will let slip away, one thing that Luke is afraid his church will let slip away and put in the lost and found box, and that is the habit of persistent prayer. Throughout the Gospel, Jesus slips away and he prays. He prays early in the morning on the mountaintops. He prays at night by the seaside. In every kind of conflict, he prays. And so it doesn't have to be in the lost and found box that we place the habit of persistent prayer, says Luke. Many of us are in the process or in the lifestyle of helping other people find lost items. Parents helping their children find dreams, coaches helping their athletes find confidence, pastors trying to help the church find new members, therapists trying to help people find new purpose and new peace of mind and ease from guilt of the past. And I would say that especially if you are involved in trying to help others find lost items, this one item we cannot afford to leave in the lost and found box, the habit of persistent prayer. The prodigal son comes to himself. As happens in many of Luke's parables, the main character comes to themselves, realizes they're on the wrong track, turns around, and heads toward God. So the prodigal son is proactive. The good shepherd gets out there and uses every means at his disposal to get down into the crevasse and get that sheep. The lost coin, not so much. What does the lost coin really have to do? Sometimes something that you think that you've lost forever comes looking for you. Not very often, but sometimes. A few years back, our oldest daughter, Melissa, was getting married. And so I somehow thought that I could perform the service, preach the wedding sermon, host many out-of-town guests in our home, and host the reception at a nearby place, all without breaking a sweat. I overheard our 2 younger children talking to each other And my daughter said to my son, she said, just stay out of her way. She is in full freak out mode. I said, what? Not me. I got it all under control. So I get in the car that Saturday morning. The wedding was that afternoon at 4. I had my list. Go to the dry cleaners, pick up the cake, go by and make sure that you have the sewing packets for the bridesmaids for their emergency sewing kits in case someone's dress rips. I had a whole list. And finally, go by the ATM machine and get out enough money for the rest of the day. So I pull in, I put in my card, and I pull my money out. I peel off going down Exchange toward turning left into our neighborhood, Twin Creeks. And I'm driving along, feeling like I've really done well that morning. And suddenly this car pulls up beside me, like this minivan, and there's a woman in it, and she's driving, I thought, erratically, and she comes closer to me, and I'm thinking, man, I look over and I'm thinking, you got kids in the car and you're drunk at 10 in the morning? What the heck? And so she continues to pull over and motion to me, and finally I rolled the window down, and she leans over and she hands me my ATM card. Sometimes, not often, something that you've left behind comes after you. A couple of years ago, I was doing a series of classes on the parables for a minister's retreat. I was talking about all the different parables in Luke and Matthew and Mark, and about how there aren't as many in John. And at the break, Gifford, a pastor named Gifford, came up to me, and he said, I have a riddle for you. Now, personally, I hate riddles. They make me feel stupid. But I said, okay, well, what is it? He said, how does the lost sheep repent? So I don't know. He said, well, think about it. And I'll check in with you later, see if you can crack the riddle. So I'm thinking about this all day. And finally, as I was taking a walk that afternoon, the light dawned. I thought, all right, I've got it, Gifford. I've got the answer. So he comes to me after dinner and he says, all right, I bet you didn't get it, did you? How does the lost sheep repent? I looked him in the eye and smiled and said, by allowing itself to be found. And he said, you guessed my riddle. By allowing itself to be found. Sometimes when our energy has ebbed and we're tired, all we have to do is just lie on the floor in the corner and God will pick us up. Just glimmer a little bit. A number of years ago, I was a pastor, an interim pastor in a church in Pennsylvania, and I was finishing up my doctoral work in preaching. And I was hoping that I would be able to find a job teaching in a seminary because that was my real goal. I loved preaching. I wanted to help teach future students. And I loved writing, and I wanted to continue that ministry. The church, as a very high honor to me, wanted me to be their pastor and to stay on. And since I had no definite job in teaching lined up, it seemed like that might be the logical thing to do. But still, I was very uneasy about this spiritually, and really felt like this was not the right thing to do. I felt like if I said yes to that, I would probably never write much again, which seemed to be a calling of mine. So one night, as I was going through this kind of soul searching, I was sleeping and I had a dream. And in the dream, I was running. And as I ran along, I accidentally dropped a coin on the ground. And I looked back at it, and it was gold and shiny. I looked back at it, and I said to myself, oh, I'll come back later, and I'll pick that up. Now you know that in dreams, coins can talk. And so as I'm running on, the coin calls out to me from the side of the road and says, come back now and pick me up, or you never will. Rabbi Eliezer, who was a teacher in the early centuries, used to ask his students, why don't you repent one day before your death? To which one student replied, but when will I know when that day comes? To which Rabbi Eliezer replied, all the more reason to repent today. The sea obeys and fetters break, and shattered hopes thou dost restore. While treasures lost are found again, when young or old, thine aid implore. Tony, Tony, turn around. Something's lost that must be found. Thanks be to God.